So the last point that Campbell makes about myth is that there is obviously a fundamental difference in terms of the stories that are told for the general edification of people in the myth, which have a lot more of that personal, sensible connection to our lives. And of course, this is probably why, as he points out here, the modern versions of stories are kind of boring in the end. Modern romance, like Greek tragedy, celebrates the mystery of dismemberment, which is life in time. The happy ending is just scorned as a misrepresentation. For the world as we know it, as we have seen it, yields but one ending: death, disintegration, dismemberment, and the crucifixion of our heart with the passing of the forms that we have loved. So of course, we are generally faced with that harsh reality that our lives are finite and that our world is finite. And looking at the myth gives us the sense that all of this has a meaning that it's much bigger than any one of us. Now, this is the obvious function of religion, of course, but it is contained in the myth itself. Now, in the regular stories that we can tell, the vision of how things end and how things work, we can tell that it is fiction. We can tell that they are ending in a way that is not natural, not realistic, and this is probably what also makes them so boring in the end. That well, we know how it ends, and if we know how it ends, then it is obviously much less exciting than opening up the world of possibilities that are contained in myth. Now, in as much as the stories are told from the point of view of the heroes or from the stories of larger than life characters, it is also important to note that those things are also going to contain parts of our world that we may not want to look at, especially not look at in a direct way. Georges Canguilhem, a French doctor turned philosopher, tells us that there is a lot more of there's a lot larger understanding of life once we start looking at the things that do not typically happen in life. That life is, of course, in form of its typical course, but it is also important to note those accidents, those odd moments, the things that are eventually the most informative about ourselves. When disease is considered an evil, therapy is given for revalorization. When disease is considered a deficiency or excess, therapy consists in compensation. Against Bernard's conception of disease, we set the existence of illnesses such as alkaptonuria, whose symptom can in no way be derived from the normal state and whose process, the incomplete metabolism of tyrosine, bears no quantitative relation to the normal process. Canguilhem argues that disease in itself is important for our lives, and it is in fact part of our lives. It is not an evil. It is not a deficiency. It is not kind of an out of the common experience, but rather it is something that should be understood as part of our lives, and as much as it is something that happens every day, all the time, just on the variety of scales. And so, therefore, a sick person should be treated as a person first who just also happens to be sick. The example he gives in this context is alkaptonuria, pictured here, which is an excess of a process in the blood. So you have it's sometimes also called black urine disease, because the word I'm looking for is amino acid. That's it. So there's too much amino acid that is broken down in the body. So the normal process of the body would be to have these amino acids separate, but in some very specific conditions, the amino acids are just kept intact by the body, and as a result, those acids build up in the body and end up showing up in urine, hence the name black urine, but also in eyes and eyeballs. So you have the ideas, the pictures here. And well, there's no good explanation for this, as Conculator points out, that you cannot make sense out of this process, the incomplete metabolism of tyrosine, based on how the process is supposed to work, because it is supposed to work in a way, and now it is working in a different way. It's not working; it is just working uh, differently. So this is a disease, and in this case, that does not have a very important consequence besides a special look. But that look is scary. It is something that is actually a pretty common trope in horror, of eyes looking a certain way. You know, we have this idea that eyes are the window of the soul, and if somebody shows up with very black eyes, then that person is immediately treated as some kind of a monster. And of course, this is also a trope in some urban legends. For example, here in the Daily Mail, posted just earlier this year, the drone appears to capture footage of a black-eyed girl stalking scene where killer murderer, 7-year-old girl, and Victorian diphtheria outbreak claim lives of local children. Now, this is Daily Mail. This is not a prime example of journalism, although, well, I'm not going to say more about that. This is not it's not the most reliable form of journalism. That's all I'm going to say. And the fact that a diphtheria outbreak appeared in a place 150 years ago is not that rare. Diphtheria is a rather common disease, and of course, the fact that children died from it is also common from this disease. And now we have a black-eyed girl, quote unquote, because that is not in fact a black-eyed girl. This is probably an artifact made by the video that is captured, and so it turns this story into a story of horror. So it could be that this black-eyed girl could be sick, but she wouldn't be any more of a monster. It could be that because of the very specific setting, the very specific relationship, or kind of what we are calling now the mythology of this story here, makes this particular headline supposedly more attention grabbing than just saying that somebody was creeping on kids with a drone. And of course, in movies, this is also something that is very easily represented. For example, the movie Elephant Man, picturing here John Merrick, who was born with a congenital disorder known as "quote unquote" the Elephant Man. Now, this is based on the real story. This is a person who was shown in human zoos, which were common in the early 20th century, late 19th century, and treated as a monster, treated as a some kind of evil character. And the name Elephant Man does not give you much trust in what this person can do or has done. But the movie shows that this is a person leading a regular life, although with a unusual exterior. He is or John Merrick, as he was portrayed in the movie, and now the real person was portrayed was a regular person who was living irregular lives, and just so happened to not be seen or seeable, which could only be contained in the context of a human zoo, where other people, quote unquote, freaks, would be exhibited, because they kind of gathered a bunch of people again in a context which made their uniqueness to be more horrible or more interesting than it otherwise would be. So so this is again in real life, this is a disease that is not necessarily identifiable if you don't have the modern science, but this is a disease that is understandable by very various ways. And in this context, the quote unquote Elephant Man turns into an anti-hero. And of course, as we have mentioned before, the heroes are typically loved for their qualities, but the anti-heroes are also loved for their qualities. And whether they are quote unquote ugly or maybe not particularly supernatural, they have also this unique value that we may attach some love to, and especially if you are an outsider to the culture. So within a culture that prizes heroes, the outsiders to the culture will hook on to the anti-hero. Shout out to the Babadook. So Campbell points out that, of course, this is the story that we are telling here in our myth. We're telling the story of the people who are living their lives against all odds, and whatever the odds might be, they are ordained in some way in the myth to make more sense to us. Man in the world of action loses his centering in the principle of eternity if he is anxious for the outcome of his deeds, but resting them and their fruits on the knees of the living God, he is released by them as by a sacrifice from the bondages of the sea of death. So this is something that the heroes perform. The heroes allow us through their sacrifice to be released from the anxiety of death, from the more dreadful parts of our existence. And even when they look ugly in a certain way, we can see in their existence something that is not us, and so we can see who we are based on who they are. Their quote unquote sacrifice, that is, they're not being as sacred as our own bodily envelopes, makes them uh, sacred to us, essentially, that we have this world that we are separating from them. So whether we are the profane, they are the sacred, or they are the sacred, we are the profane, we place ourselves in this mythology towards them, and the gods touching them in some way to be either cursed or blessed, or to be rewarded or punished, puts them more specifically into the domain of mythology rather than it puts them into the domain of our real life story. So it is rather important that we also see the actual meaning behind these myths and what that requires for our culture, because the monsters and the heroes and the myth are really telling us about our culture a lot more than it is telling us about the individual aspects of people. So similarly, Canguilhem points out that the pathological is normal. Disease reveals normal functions to us at the precise moment when it deprives us of their exercise. Disease is the source of the speculative attention which life attaches to life by means of man. If health is life in the silence of the organs, then strictly speaking, there is no science to health. Health is organic innocence. It must be lost, like all innocence, so that knowledge may be possible. Physiology is like all science, which, as Aristotle say, proceeds from wonder, but the truly vital wonder is the anguish caused by disease. So we live in the silence of organs, and we are free to listen to the silence of our organs just as much as we are free to go around the cultural life that is pre-existing for us. But also, if we look at the myth, if we look at the disease, if we look at what our cultures are scared of, we can also make sense of exactly the processes that make these things happen and the inner workings of the human body as much as the inner workings of our lives, the waves that we are going through, and the possible results from all of this. So in regard to things that are sacred in general, the only thing that we can point out is that the sacred is only existing by opposition to the profane, and the profane only exists by opposition to the sacred, and what is quote unquote real only exists by opposition to the unreal. The unreal only exists by opposition to what is real. We kind of place these arbitrary points of health, of good, of bad into our world so that we have a way to anchor ourselves. But in the end, they remain part of our normalcy. So we know this, and we have known this for quite a while. This is from Linnaeus, who made a classification of the things of nature, a kind of a foundational move in the history of the scientific method in the 18th century. Linnaeus classifies Homo sapiens among the primates. The primates, that is, the prime examples of animals, and so the humans alongside the apes and the larger apes and the lesser apes are the primates. And on the right, as part of the humankind, so on the left you have Homo sapiens, of course, you have Homo americanus, the American man, and on the right you have Homo monstruosus, the human monsters. Monsters are these people who are classified among us, but that we can also not neatly classify. But these classifications are artificial, of course. They are not designed to be the end all be all. They are these very arbitrary points of view that we can tell. And so among the human monsters, there's the alpine human, who is small and shy. There's the Patagonian human, who is tall and slow. There's the human from South Africa, who only has one testicle. There's the human with a big skull, the human with a flat skull, etc. There's the people that live between the tropics. Anyway, there's all kinds of people that are marked as monsters according to Linnaeus because they are these points of reference that he does not know, that he cannot refer to, and that he has no actual scientific understanding of. But he still recognizes them as humans. He still recognizes them as a thing that is much more like us than anything else outside of nature. These are not animals; they are monsters. This is also the claim that Elephant Man has is that he is a man. He is not a monster. He is a thing like us. He just happens to not look a certain way. So, myth for us is certainly our attachment to the rest of the world and our way to make sense of the things that are different, but the same, and the thing that are the same but different. To know that the things that are part of our world are also partly out of our world, and therefore that we as people are kind of living in this world, but also have much larger meaning to our lives.